Ladies and gentlemen, this country is involved right now in a civil war. We are right now involved in a situation where the powers that be, the people that are currently in control of our government, hate our democratic republic, hate our Constitution. I wish he'd left his copy up here, because, ladies and gentlemen, right now, this is the end of our United States of America as we've known it, unless we do something right stinking now. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a federal government which hates the Constitution. We have a president of the United States where we have a First Amendment who has declared that he can create a disinformation governance board. And I just start with this as an example, because where the heck is the outrage? How come there are not 50 Republican senators standing on the Capitol steps screaming, you cannot have something like a disinformation governance board in the United States of America, where there is no United States of America? How come when the president announces mandatory COVID lockdowns, which would keep us from going to work and keep us from going to school and keep us from going to church, how come there are not 50 Republican senators and every single Republican congressman standing on the Capitol steps screaming, no, we have freedom of religion in this country. We have freedom of assembly in this country. We do not have a United States of America if these things are allowed to exist. But all you get is crickets. Right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I don't usually do this, but we've got 39 days left till the primary election, and the gloves have to come off, and I'm going to start being a little bit more me from now on this. I've been real reticent so far. Any of you have seen me talk before, you know what a quiet little mouse I've been. But I'm going to be a little bit louder now. Here's the thing. I'm not one of those guys that went straight from high school to college to law school and out there in ivory towers and never got my fingers dirty, never did any hard work. I didn't go to college after high school. I went to work. I went to work before college, before high school. I started working on the riverfront in St. Louis when I was 15 years old. When I was 16 years old, I was a deckhand on a riverboat. When I was 17 years old, I was an engineer on a riverboat. By the time I was 18 years old, I was a chief engineer on a fleet of 3 riverboats in downtown St. Louis. Ladies and gentlemen, I worked as a foreign car mechanic. I've painted cars. I've painted motorcycles. I've worked on farms. I've done just about every kind of thing we can do. And then eventually I decided it was time to go to school, and I went to college. And I did real well in college. I went to SMU. I got 3 degrees in 3 years. I had the highest average of anybody coming out of SMU who applied to SMU Law School that year. And so they gave me my law school education for free. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been a lifetime conservative. I've been a lifetime Republican. I've been a lifetime advocate of our traditional Western Christian values. Ladies and gentlemen, the young man here in the room who went with me to a lecture by a guy named Trifono Sono back in 1977 during Robert Mugabe's takeover of Rhodesia. And he can tell you that was the first time when we made an impression upon the left, when we stood up and said, we're going to call you out for the kind of murderous communist you are. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been an avid anti-communist my whole life. My dad was a member of the John Birch Society. My mother was a president of what used to be called the West County Republican Women's Club. She got a guy by the name of Jack Buechner elected as a Republican in the 2nd District when it had been a Democrat stronghold, and it's been a Republican seat ever since. Ladies and gentlemen, when that mob came to my door 2 years ago next Sunday, the mob came knocking on my door disguised as an angry mob, but they hit the wrong damn door, because this is what I've been made for my whole life. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have any more time. You may know that after the assault on our house, and particularly the second one, where we had some support from the White House, that what we did was we went to work for President Trump. Now, I'm not going to go into it in detail because it's late at night. Most of you guys know our story. But what you don't know is the mob came back the Friday after that initial assault, specifically to kill us and burn down the house. And we had some help from the White House. We had some help from other folks. But the bottom line is that when a mob now numbering 1,000 hit our gate Friday night, July the 3rd, 2020, we had 6 ex-Navy SEALs. We had 10 secondary employment cops. We had the FBI light aircraft circling the top of the house. We had what we used to call during the Reagan administration peace through superior firepower. And ladies and gentlemen, we held off that mob. But that was the night that President Trump That was the night that President Trump gave his Mount Rushmore address. We didn't get a chance to see it that night because we were a little busy protecting our rear ends, but we watched it the next morning. And President Trump talked about defeating Marxist extremism in this country. And then we watched the mainstream media response. And the mainstream media called that the most divisive speech that a president could give. And my wife and I look at each other and we say, if defeating Marxist extremism in this country is divisive, like we're expected to live together in harmony with the forces that seek to destroy our culture, destroy our civilization, destroy our religion, take our property, and eventually enslave us. If that's what the deep state, if that's what the swamp, if that's what the mainstream media thinks is appropriate, there's something fundamentally wrong in this country, and we made a vow that day to do whatever we could for the rest of our lives, to put our lives on hold, and do everything we could for the rest of our lives to pull back our freedoms, to save this country, to pull back those constitutional, God-given rights. And ladies and gentlemen, that's what we've been doing ever since. We went to work for the Trump campaign. We campaigned through Texas 2 different times, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas, Pennsylvania. In fact, we were the Team Trump bus in Pennsylvania for a while. Patty and I, alone, on the Team Trump bus, doing 7 organized rallies a day for the president and getting off the bus in between the organized rallies at contributors' offices and supporting restaurants. 12, 14 times a day, we'd get off that bus and I'd talk to the people in this country. And I'd say, this is our last opportunity to save this country. This is our last opportunity that if we don't win back the House and the Senate and the presidency, there will never be this democratic republic again. That we're now 1 vote away from losing everything we hold near and dear. In the United States Senate, we're 1 vote away from having that, what's now called the John Lewis Voter Rights Act, that H.R. 1 established, where there'll never be another free election again. We're 1 vote in the Senate away from having our elections nationalized. We're 1 vote in the Senate away from having the Supreme Court packed to where nothing in that Constitution will ever be upheld again. We're 1 vote away in the Senate from having D.C. and Puerto Rican statehood, and where we'll never have a Republican majority in the Senate again. The time has come for decisive action. There is no longer any time for politics as usual. There's no longer any time for politicians as usual. Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not the same thing over and over and over again. But I can tell you something about the people that I'm running against. And I'll go ahead and go through them one at a time. There's Billy Long, who's the 7th District Congressman. Very nice guy, he's a friend of mine. We text each other about 10 times a day. But I've been campaigning now for 56 weeks. And Billy Long has gone to every single thing almost that we've had. He's the 2nd hardest working guy out there. He's never once mentioned a single bill that he's introduced. That's right. He's never once mentioned a single policy issue. He's never once mentioned anything other than auctioning off somebody's cell phone on the Capitol building and having a yellow tie, okay? I don't own a yellow tie. If I thought that would make me a senator, I'd buy a yellow tie. But then you got Vicki Hartzler. Vicki Hartzler also has been in Congress for 12 years. Vicki Hartzler, every night when she goes up there, identifies as her primary accomplishment as a United States representative that she got a law passed that allows the Customs and Border Patrol to take down drones. Okay? Are we going to save the country by taking down drones at the border? Then we have the ex-governor. And I don't have to say too much about the ex-governor, except that if you actually read the testimony against him in the House Special Investigative Committee report, and you realize that this is testimony under oath, without spin or without bias, but just actual sworn testimony. And when you add to that the ex-wife's most recent affidavits and the documents she released just yesterday, which were contemporaneous emails to her marriage counselor and her lawyers about how dangerous Eric Greitens had become, how unstable he'd become, his threats of suicide, the threats of harm to himself and others, you realize that this is one very disturbed and very dangerous man, and he just cannot be in this race. He is not fit to hold any kind of office. And then you get Eric Schmidt, right? A very nice guy, and he does what an attorney general is supposed to do. He files lawsuits. He tends to file lawsuits that gets him on the front page of the newspaper and on Fox television, and then he tends to do very little about that later on. And I'll give you a personal example. After my wife and I were charged with felonies for doing no more than defending ourselves, he filed a brief in the St. Louis Circuit Court saying that what they were doing to us was unconstitutional. Well, that was 2 years ago. He had never brought it up for hearing. He never advanced it in any way. He filed it and walked away, all right? He'll tell you every night that he was the first Attorney General of the United States to sue the country of China. And he did that 2 years ago. Never got China served. Never even made a legitimate attempt to get China served. Here's a guy who has spent, when he was in the Missouri Senate, he was consistently referred to as the 9th Democrat, but he only got his Republican bona fides when he decided to run for Senate. So here we have career politicians. We were in a Senate debate down in Joplin about 4 months ago now. And the last question was, what makes you the best candidate for this office? And so I go down the list. 12 years in politics, 12 years in politics, 17 years in politics, 28 years in politics, no years in politics, okay? And I think that's what we need up there. Let me talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the world today and why I start with saying this country is involved in a civil war. Every crisis that this government unleashes upon us, from the border crisis, and I'll get back to that in just a second, to the loss of energy independence, to inflation, to the price of gas, to the debacle in Afghanistan, to the current war in Ukraine, each one of these things is not the result of incompetence. I go to these meetings every night, sometimes 3 of these a day, and all the other candidates talk about how incompetent Joe Biden is and what a senile old poop he is, and he is, and how Kamala Harris is the dumbest human being ever elected to high office, and she is. But then they talk about how all this incompetence has led to the current crisis the country's in. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the result of incompetence. This is not the result of buffoonery. This is a fruition of a plan that has been being laid out for longer than anybody in this room has been alive. On March 21st of this year, addressing the Business Roundtable CEO Luncheon, Joe Biden managed to finally scrape together enough incompetence to tell the truth despite what his cue card said. And he said that an inflection point like this only comes around once every 3 or 4 generations. And that he said we need to use the war in Ukraine as an inflection point to create a new world order. His exact words were that there's going to be a new world order and we have to lead it. That's what this is all about. Each one of these crises du jour are designed to do 2 things. One is to take your mind off the big picture, and the other is to advance that big picture. Why does the left want riots in the streets? Why does the left want to have, in the person of the President of the United States, encouraging the violation of federal law to intimidate Supreme Court justices? Why did Kamala Harris bail people out of jail so they can go and riot the next day? Why, in more than 28 American major cities, are Soros-funded prosecutors refusing to enforce the law? Because frightened people want the government to help them. Why, in the breadbasket of the world, is the federal government now preparing us for food shortages?
Right.
Because if you think people will give up their rights over this pandemic, think what they're willing to give up if their babies start to starve. And then you think about why baby formula is off the shelf. I mean, all of these things, you don't have to think very hard to know where all this is going. The government wants us to be frightened, poor, hungry, because poor, frightened, hungry people ask the government for a solution. Ladies and gentlemen, I always figured that at some point in our lives, FEMA would create some kind of full emergency and declare martial law and tell us we're all under house arrest and we couldn't go to work and we couldn't go to school and we couldn't go to church, but I figured they'd have to put a gun to our heads to make us comply. And then 2 years and 3 months ago, the government just asked, and everybody did it, okay? I call that the final exam on American freedom. What more proof could the powers that be have of how absolutely cowed the American people have become, other than that the government just asked everybody and they just complied, even if it meant losing their livelihoods, losing their businesses, losing their life savings, losing the ability to see their own parents and grandparents pass away in nursing homes, even if it meant as a man you couldn't see the birth of your own children, and everybody just did it. Ladies and gentlemen, We must never allow anything like that ever to happen in this country again. We now have a federal government which is so close to taking away every single constitutional God-given right we have. We have a Department of Justice that has declared that the greatest threat to this country isn't the Chinese government that vows every day to destroy us economically and militarily and socially. It isn't even the Russians that the left constantly tries to hold up as a great boogeyman. It isn't Iran. It isn't Arab terrorism. The DOJ has decided that the greatest threat to American freedom is us. God-fearing Christian white people that love the Constitution and love this country. That's what we're told by the DOJ is the greatest threat to this country. The Department of Justice has created a task force to identify and track people that resist authority. Okay? What do you think that exists for? The FBI has designated moms and dads that have the gall to wish to be in control of their kids' education as domestic terrorists, okay? The federal government, what are vaccine mandates all about? What are vaccine mandates for the military all about? It's about identifying those people who will comply and those people who will not. Exactly. 18 Republican senators voted for the Vax database, okay? What's a database for? I got tremendous flack in the federal national press a few months ago when I first started talking about this. What's it for? All these mandates are designed to do two things. One is to exclude from every organization, the government, healthcare, education, sports, and even entertainment, anybody that won't comply with unconstitutional mandates, and create a list of everybody who refuses. And they talked to me on the national press and they said, well, Mr. McCloskey, do you think they're going to round us all up and put us in concentration camps? And I said, well, how many millions of people did Stalin kill? How many millions of people did Chairman Mao kill? How many people disappeared in Cuba? How many people are disappearing right now in Venezuela? How many people did Pol Pot kill? In my lifetime, and just you don't have to go very far back, 100 million lives snuffed out by the left. And then people ask me, are you serious about this? And in case you think I'm being a little hyperbolic, think about the World Health Organization. Yeah. President Trump took us out of the WHO. Biden put us back in. Who runs the World Health Organization? The Director General is a guy named Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. He's a Stalinist communist. He used to run something called the Tigray People's Liberation Front of Ethiopia. He's a murderous communist. You know who he wanted to have be the goodwill ambassador of the World Health Organization? A little guy that my friend Bob and here I knew back in 1977 named Robert Mugabe, the butcher of Rhodesia, a man that took the wealthiest country per capita on earth and reduced it to a starving wasteland where they've reverted to cannibalism. This is who our government wants to put in charge of our lives. The Biden administration has insisted amendments to the proposed global pandemic treaty to require that each member organization have an enforcement entity, a police force, to enforce the rules of the global pandemic treaty, which gives that entity, the WHO, the power to describe what is a public health emergency. Part of their policy is to create what they call national and international organizations to proactively investigate and control misinformation and disinformation, to create on a national and global basis digital vaccine passports to control travel. And one of the things that the Biden administration insisted on was changes so that no member nation, including the United States, could veto or object to any of the regulations of the World Health Organization or even control the enforcement agencies. So under this treaty, if it gets adopted, we've ceded our sovereignty to a non-governmental international agency, and we've been required to create a police force in our country to make sure that our citizens comply, and we're prohibited by the Biden administration's rules from having any control over that police force. You got to ask yourself, what sense does it make? What possible reason would there be for the United States government to subject us to these provisions of the World Health Organization run by overt Stalinist communists, and it's because the people that run this country view that as the ideal for our government, view that, the model of the Chinese government, the model of the Soviet Union, as the ideal government for us. And that's what we're facing if we don't take this country back right now. Ladies and gentlemen, when I call the COVID-19 lockdowns the final exam on American freedom, I mean it. Right now, every single freedom that we have is at the verge of being permanently destroyed. And I do it every time I make this speech for the last 2 years. If I go back further, I think the first thing we did on behalf of Donald Trump was July the 13th of 2020. And since then, Patty and I have been campaigning for our God-given rights almost every single day. But here it is. It's a Declaration of Independence. It's a basis for everything we hold near and dear. Do you remember when Joe Biden tried to recite that? You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, the men and the women. Well, you know the thing. Well, the problem is he doesn't know the thing. The Democrats don't know the thing. They do not believe in that thing, okay? They don't believe in God-given rights because they don't believe in God. And I'm going to digress here a little bit. My wife and I were down at a pro-life rally in front of Planned Parenthood this morning in celebration of the Supreme Court's decision reversing Roe v. Wade. And if you ever want to see the personification of evil, I'm standing there talking to one of the priests, while one of our Missouri legislators, Rasheed Aldridge, and a young lady who is running for the United States Senate as well, are chanting profanity and screaming into their microphones and chanting fervently in favor of wanting to murder children. And I looked at the priest and I said, if you ever want proof that the devil is evil, the devil is real, and evil is real, all you have to do is look right there. Because can you imagine any human being who would actually fervently, angrily, and insistently demand the right to murder children in this country? And ladies and gentlemen, so I digress, but here's the thing. This country is on the verge of destruction. This country has a passive, beaten down civil population that is, and I've got to apologize, ladies and gentlemen, I'm working about 3.5 hours of sleep a night these days. You know, I'm a trial lawyer, been a trial lawyer my whole life. There was a time in my life when I was trying so many lawsuits and getting so little sleep. I was trying a lawsuit in federal court up in Omaha, Nebraska. I actually fell asleep during my own opening statement. Okay? I'm almost that tired now, but I'm going to keep going on. Ladies and gentlemen, there's only one way we're going to fix this. I call this a post-political time in America. The government's not there to help us. The government is always there just to take more power and enslave us. What's the Second Amendment about? Well, good deference to the idiot in D.C., Sleepy Uncle Joe. It's not about shooting deer in Kevlar. You remember a guy named David Chipman? He was being promoted as the head of ATF. They asked him, because the government always wants to take away these things they call assault weapons, if he could define an assault weapon, and he could not. A couple of days later, I was on a national program, and I was giving him, you know what, about that. So the guy says, well, Mr. McCloskey, can you define an assault weapon? I said, sure, it's easy. It's an effective defense against an overreaching government, right? And that's what the Second Amendment's all about. When you recognize that these people are evil, that it's not just a difference of political opinion, but they're actually evil. They relish a culture of death. You cannot negotiate with them. You can't meet them halfway. You can't appease the devil because he just takes more. And what we see every day is the left, Chuck Schumer moving 20 paces to the left, and then Mitch McConnell saying, okay, we'll compromise, we'll meet them in the middle, and move 19 steps to the left. And then 20 more steps to the left, and 19 more steps to the left. And every year and every day, for as long as I've been alive, a constant erosion of our civil rights until January 20th, a year ago, when all of our rights were swept away, because we now have a government in power that will take every right away if we let them. So I call this a post-political time in America. You got to do something different right now or this country won't last. One of my opponents, the current Attorney General, always talks about how we need to take the next 10 years to save this country. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this country doesn't have 10 years. This country has 6 months. If we don't fix this problem before the end of this election cycle, we will never get this country back. So, ladies and gentlemen, I say each and every one of us needs to now take a personal stand for our freedom, to stand up and say we will resist. We will not comply with any unconstitutional mandate. We will be a free people. We will not be sheep. We will not comply. We will be people that are proud of our heritage, proud of our religion, proud of our country, proud of our founding fathers, and proud to kneel when we pray and stand for the American flag. Ladies and gentlemen, people always say, what good will it do to elect one more conservative constitutionalist senator? I mean, if I get elected to the Senate, we'd have folks like me and Rand Paul and Mike Lee and Ron Johnson, and I can't put Ted Cruz in that anymore since he called the January 6ers terrorists. But the bottom line is that sometimes one man can make a difference. And if you need any evidence of that, think about Donald Trump. Okay? And I want to say one last thing. I talked a little bit about the second assault in our house. But the first assault in our house, June 28th, 2020, when a crowd of 350 to 500 people tore down our gate, stormed our house, threatened to kill me, rape and murder my wife, kill our dog, burn our house, burn down my office. We stood out there, 2 people against a mob with 2 guns, and we faced them down. And that's what that Second Amendment's all about. But ladies and gentlemen, out of all those people that broke down my gate and stormed my house and threatened to kill me, not one of them has spent a day in jail or been charged with any serious crime. Not one of them ever got charged with any crime by the circuit attorney's office. But ladies and gentlemen, right now, we've got people rotting in solitary confinement in Washington, D.C. for over a year and a half now on crimes of trespass or parading without a license or no crimes at all. What do you call people that are doing solitary confinement for trespass? You call them political prisoners. What do you call a government that holds political prisoners? You don't call a free democratic republic. Ladies and gentlemen, on the issue of where the heck is the outrage, how come there are not 50 Republican senators every day standing out there in the Capitol steps screaming, how come we're keeping political prisoners in this country? Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, all these things are outrageous. It will not get fixed if you elect the traditional politician. If you like the crisis this country's in, if you like the state of our nation, if you like the loss of our civil liberties, then vote for the traditional candidate. Vote for the guy that's been in there for 12 years or 17 years or 28 years, and then hold your breath and expect significant change, and we'll all turn blue and pass away. Because the only way we're going to change things is by changing the kind of people we send. My name is Mark McCloskey. I've dedicated the rest of my life to pulling back our God-given liberties, and I'll go ahead and do what I started a few minutes ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, securing their just powers from the consent of the governed. And ladies and gentlemen, the time has come to withdraw that consent, to pull back that consent of the government, to go to D.C. and tell them, this is our country, we're taking it back, you work for us, you are not public masters, you're public servants, and this is our country. Thank you very much.